The Gouf. Beloved by all, piloted only by the raddest of dudes, it's a cool mobile suit, with an appearance drawing so much from the Zaku, but still being its own design. But what is a mobile suit without its arsenal? And that's today's subject. Slothcake's here, and let's focus on one of the oddest weapons in the Gouf's kit, that's just really unique even in Gundam standards, and that's the Heat Rod. Found on the right forearm of the MS-07B Gouf, when deployed, it releases a thick metal tentacle whip thing. It can be handled with its hands, and it's a pretty dandy tool. If skilled enough, it could be used like a whip to smack, wrap around, or restrain things. But here's when things get interesting, for the Heat Rod has two neat features. First is its cutting abilities, famously shown to cut the foot off the Gundam, but also the wing off a Medea carrier. So this thing's got some power behind it. But with the name Heat Rod, it's not as much as you'd think. There are plenty of times where the Heat Rod is doing damage, but not an appropriate amount for a heat weapon. This would lead to either the Heat Rod is a heat weapon that doesn't reach the same high temperatures as Zeon's standard heat melee, maybe because this is a whip and still needs to bend around, which maybe it can't do if it's too hot, which would explain why it doesn't change color, and why it can still do damage but not as much. Or maybe, and more horrifyingly, my life could be a lie and the Heat Rod isn't actually a heat weapon, it's just maybe the name sounds cool. For its next trick, the Heat Rod can deliver high voltage shocks. This shock was shown to disable a mobile suit and even reach the pilot. If held long enough, I'd say it would heavily damage the mobile suit's internals while maybe leaving the pilot extra crispy. The Heat Rod's length is longer than you'd think, being farther than melee distance and shown to reach from a nice length. How is this all stored in the forearm though? I guess Zeon space magic. Now, this thing is pretty impressive. Zeon being able to make a rod tentacle thing that has cutting properties, deliver electric shocks, be bendable, and come back to be stored in the forearm is impressive. Not only is this thing really cool, it also seems really complicated to make and work. The Heat Rod, while can be used for utility, it brings another melee weapon to the table that can outrange the opponent. With a single swing, while it might not be able to cut everything, it's gonna do serious damage to whatever it comes contact with. With its electric shock, it can disable mobile suits for a non-lethal, or you could follow up for a lethal, cause why not, option. Plus, on top of all this, it's a whip weapon, which is unorthodox. You can bet the enemy has no idea how to fight against it, giving you the upper hand. However, the Heat Rod does have its problems. The utility of this tool is nice, but it feels like the shock element is the real star of the show here. The rod part, while can do damage, doesn't seem too necessary. The Gouf has ranged weapons, and can carry a heat saber, a superior cutting weapon. The Heat Rod just seems too complicated for its own good. A long-range stun weapon is a good idea, but maybe not in this form. While whip is an unorthodox weapon to fight, it's also unorthodox to use. Whips are not something you can just pick up and play. Because of its unique concept, it's expensive to produce, and it seems like a nuisance to maintain and repair. Then, as for the name, I do think Taser Tentacle is more appropriate than Heat Rod for what it does. But maybe the Gouf is just not the right home for the Heat Rod. Well, we got another mobile suit. A variant of the Agguguy, we have the Agguguy, which has not one, not two, but 4 heat rods, 2 on each forearm, and that's the only weapon it has. Besides head Vulcans, this thing is just what I said, but times 4. 2 heat rods slamming against you might as well just slice you in half, or maybe in the second swing. And with 4 rods delivering an electric shock, that's lights out for your mobile suit and you. The Agguguy was developed for the invasion of the Underground Federation base Jaburo, and was specialized to fight in close, narrow quarters. This could have been Zeon's second attempt to try the Heat Rod, or maybe they just wanted to use up or just had to work with what they had lying around. But yeah, same cons, now it's 4 times as expensive. I've covered the Agguguy more in depth before, so go check that out if you want. It's right in the little corner, or you can click the link down below. But if you don't, that won't hurt my feelings or anything, so let's move on. Anywho, Zeon realized the cons overshadowed the pros with the Heat Rod, and shelved it. To my knowledge, the Gouf, a variant or two, and the Agguguy are the only mobile suits to have it. This would mark the end of the heat rod, but it would lead to something else. You see, Zeon's no quitter, and they would get the heat rod and redesign it, give it another shot. So they went back to the drawing boards, got their craniums cranking, and tried to keep the same vibe, but maximize efficiency while cutting out all that excess fat. Found on the MS07B3 Gouf Custom, we have the new and improved heat wire, located in the same spot, and when deployed out, it's now a thin wire. This alone takes up less space than the rod, meaning you can store more in the forearm, increasing range. At the end, we have a powerful magnet and 3-prong anchor that gives a strong, sturdy grip. And the hands of a skilled pilot, like Best Dad Norris, utilize the heat wire to its fullest, using the damn thing to swing around, retrieve objects, and even use to brace himself to be lowered. It's only limited to your imagination and skill. But we got one more thing. The heat wire can not heat up, but still can deliver a high voltage shock, shown to disable a mobile suit with direct contact. While the heating element is removed and it's no longer a whip weapon, it's an overall improvement. The versatility is a nice addition, and the overall changes from the original Gouf to the custom as a whole made it more versatile, fit more roles, have more options other than the original's hey diddle diddles straight down the middle. While losing the cutting capabilities of the heat rod, this was for the better. Overall, the shock element seemed like it was pulling all the weight behind this weapon. As for the name, yeah, the heat wire doesn't heat up, but it sounds cooler than the shock wire, or the zap cord. Shock string? But let's move on. The heat wire would be a success, but while it did cut down on the many flaws of the heat rod, it was still something that only skilled pilots could truly utilize, so it wasn't widespread. And with it being integrated into the Gouf's arm, it would take some extra work to attach it to other mobile suits. But it does raise a question. Who would benefit from this? Would a Dom type find success from the heat wire? A high mobility suit? Or maybe an amphibian? Well, Zeon and others thought the same, so let's go look at things that are similar or just have the same vibe. In the 1-year war, the Federation amphibious mobile suits, the Aqua Gym, the Gym Dominance Underwater type, and Gundam Marine type have forearm grapple hooks. However, they're just grapple hooks with clamps, no shocky bits at the end. The Gyms have 2, one on each arm, and the Gundam has 1. While on amphibians, we have the much later introduced Zaku Marina with its magnet Harkin, which is a heat wire with a different name and it's used underwater. And while not a whip or rod weapon, we do have the Striker Custom Shock Knuckles, mecha knuckle dusters that deliver a shock upon impact. But now I believe that's it for the 1-year war. But this concept, while not becoming standard issue, is seen replicated and slightly changed throughout the timeline. Going to the Grips War, Gundam Zeta, we have the Sea Serpent, an optional weapon found on a few mobile suits. It's essentially the heat rod but with 2 new features. First, due to it being used in space, it has thrusters at the end, giving an extra push so it can reach its targets, which in turn increases the effective range and makes it get from point A to point B faster. But its second feature, which puts a new spin on it, is it's no longer integrated to the mobile suit's forearm, but now it's a handheld. At a glance, it looks like a cool beam saber handle. Not being attached to the mobile suit does give the downside of a longer draw time. It's faster to deploy something attached to you than it is to draw it then deploy it. However, we do have some amazing benefits. Due to it being a handheld, it can be easily used by anyone who has manipulators, allowing it to be used by regular looking mobile suits like the Marasai, or a transformable one like the Humblebee. It's a nice change, having the option to or not to deploy with it. It adds versatility to a mobile suit's kit and squad. In Zeta, a group of these blue Stingray mobile suits with a name I'm not going to try to pronounce again, would attach their sea serpents together, creating a web net known as the Spider's Web. This was used to ensnare enemies in as they flew by them. Moving forward a bit, we have the shock anchor on the Geara Doga, which is essentially the sea serpent but now back integrated into the mobile suit. Unless I'm mistaken, which I am often, the only non-game appearance of this would be in the manga 0094 Across the Sky, where Geara Doga uses this against the Delta Kai. Originally from an SD game, we have the Dezpanda, which has the side rods, 4 in total with 2 on each shoulder rack. They deploy out like the sea serpents, but as the name suggests, they're new type weapons, controlled via the mind of new types. They're wire-guided weapons, zipping around to the target, and once they reach it, they just give them a little bit of a boop and the usual electric shock. It's a really cool weapon, and it's a nice spin on the idea. While only limited to how far the wire goes, and maybe not lethal on their own, but who knows. Maybe 4 making contact at the same time is enough to permanently fry the mobile suit or the pilot. I just really like this thing. I'm a huge sucker for non-shooting new type funnel bit weapons. They're a really cool concept. Now we're gonna jump all the way to UC-123, Gundam F91, to talk about the mobile armor, the Rafflesia. While having many things, today's focus is the tentacle rods, which, in my opinion, shares enough with the heat rods that they should be mentioned. Located in the 5 binders above, in total we have a whopping of 125 tentacles, with 25 on each binder. Each tentacle, shown to be a thin rod, can be used to ensnare and restrain mobile suits. But that's not all. At the end of each one, we have a cool tip that houses not only a beam gun, but the much cooler superheated chainsaw. That's right, this thing has chainsaws at the end of each tentacle that heats up like Zeon's heat weapons of the 1-year war. Having heat weapons consumes less energy compared to that of beam, and when you're working with such a big number, it starts to show. While it is a worse cutting weapon, when you have 125 of them, which are also chainsaws, they're gonna do the job just fine. Let's now move a little bit forward to UC-153, to Gundam Victory, to something that feels like it's the next step in technology for the heat wire, and that's the beam strings. First found on the Zolot, they're not in the forearm or handheld, but stored in the launchers in the shoulders. It's 5-string beam emitters. Each tube shoots a beam string, which is actually a thin illuminated electromagnetic wire. It can be used to ensnare enemy mobile suits, leaving them helpless for a follow-up, and they do have slight cutting properties as well. So, as they started on the Gouf as an odd, questionable weapon that somehow outlived him, and saw variations throughout the years, with later ones maybe not being inspired, but keeping the same vibe. From here, we move to alternate universes, where they make many references to Universal Century, from mobile suit designs, weapons, and surprisingly, the heat rod. While we do get whip-like weapons, like in G Gundam, the Master Gundam's Master Cloth, and the Nobel Gundam's Beam Ribbon, we have 2 examples that are clearly based off the heat rod. So in chronological order, let's move into AC, After Colony, Gundam Wing, where we have the beloved, iconic, loved by all, the Gundam Epyon, a beautiful mobile suit that's peak wing design. Something that many years later, I can't decide if I like it more or as much as the Tall Geese. Anywho, the Epyon has only 2 weapons, both melee, the awesome internally powered beam saber, which is its own story by itself, but for today, on its left arm we have a shield that houses the heat rod, which is a heat rod, original with the name there. Same song and dance, but with a nice new look, having these segmented blade shells that overlap each other. Just looking at these things, they seem like they will do some serious damage by themselves, but when heated, that's when things get scary. This thing has some serious power, being shown to cut 3 Leos in half in a single swing. New look, same concept, but with a little bit more power thrown into it. However, it's not shown to deliver the electric shock, so it's all offense all the time, which fits the Epyon just fine. And just to bring up the beloved Tall Geese 3, it also has the same heat rod. It's identical, also found in the shield, does the same thing. God, I love the Tall Geese 3. Now let's mosey over to Cosmic Era, Gundam SEED, with a much more blatant reference, and yeah, much more on the nose than the Epyon's heat rod. So, introducing the Gouf Ignited with its own heat rod, named the Heat Rod. It's also called the Slayer Whip. Equipped with 2, 1 on each forearm, they can deliver a strong electrical shock, shown to even reach the pilot, and if held long enough, maybe could deliver electrocution. but it was also shown to be able to destroy things, like when it wrapped around the Geara Gundam's beam rifle. Except for that one exception, the heat rod, as the name implies, can heat up via high frequency. And while not as strong as the Epions, it still cut through armor with ease in a single swipe. While the Slayer Whip would be used primarily by the Gouf types, and also be shown in the Gyan Storm, an interesting version of this is found on the Gouf Crusher. While only having one Slayer Whip on its right arm, it has an attachment. Stored on its back when not in use, it holds something extremely similar to the Raider Gundam's spherical breaker. It can use the whip to attach it and boom, you're now a bootleg Raider Gundam. It's a really cool idea, and I actually didn't know this thing existed until I was doing research for this video. Damn, this thing's cool. So, while there are many other reoccurring weapons that get shown throughout Gundam, many much more iconic, beam rifle, beam saber, funnels, head Vulcans, there's something that always appealed to me about the Gouf. He's just a pretty cool looking mobile suit, and there's something about the heat rod. Not that it's practical, not game changing, it's not vital to the Gouf, it gets changed in its redesign, but it's pretty neat. Neat enough that I want to talk about it, since surprisingly, it has enough lore and history to talk about it. I don't know why, but something about whip tentacle thing like weapons seemed like an interesting topic. Like, I mean, come on, whips are not the best fighting weapon. I would rather have many other choices. But come on man, they are so cool. Anyone who uses one is going to look cool while doing it. It's truly peak rule of cool design, and it's multitude when it's on a giant robot. Anywho, thanks for listening to my rambles. We have come to the conclusion of this video. Thank you all for listening. If you dozed off, sweet dreams. But like usual, Sloth Kicks here. Have a good one and hope to see you next time.